when three popular students decided to teach the quiet new girl a lesson by forcing her down a marble staircase. They had no idea they were about to face a former state wrestling champion who'd been hiding her deadly skills behind a mask of grief and silence. What happened next sent shockwaves through the entire school and turned a moment of intended cruelty into an unforgettable lesson about underestimating the wrong person. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The mountain air bit sharp against exposed skin as students hurried through the courtyard of Riverside Falls High School, their breath forming small clouds in the November chill. Snow-capped peaks loomed over the affluent Colorado town like silent guardians, casting long shadows across the modern brick facade of the school building. Inside those walls, 17-year-old Maya Rodriguez moved through the crowded hallways like water flowing around stones, her presence barely registering on the radar of her classmates who were too absorbed in their own dramas to notice the girl in the oversized military jacket. Maya kept her head down as she navigated toward her locker, dark hair falling like a curtain across her face, hiding eyes that had seen too much for someone her age. The jacket, forest green with faded patches, had belonged to her mother during her service years, and Maya wore it like armor against a world that felt increasingly hostile with each passing day. 6 months had passed since the accident that claimed her mother's life. 6 months since she and her father Miguel had packed their lives into boxes and moved to this mountain town where everything felt foreign and cold. Riverside Falls was the kind of place where money talked and heritage mattered, where families had owned ski lodges for generations and teenagers drove vehicles worth more than most people's annual salaries. The school reflected this wealth in its polished floors, state-of-the-art facilities, and trophy cases that gleamed under fluorescent lights, displaying decades of athletic achievements. Wrestling, however, was notably absent from those displays, the program having been neglected for years in favor of more prestigious sports that brought glory and college recruiters. Maya understood the social hierarchy within days of arriving. At the apex stood Chloe Bennett, whose platinum blonde hair and designer everything marked her as royalty in this teenage kingdom. Her father owned half the ski slopes in the area, and Chloe carried herself with the confidence of someone who had never been told no, never faced consequences for her actions. Beside her stood Hunter Morrison, 6 feet of sculpted muscle and arrogance, whose football accomplishments were legend in a town that worshipped athletic success. The third member of their triumvirate was Sophia Walsh, whose perfectly curated social media presence and sharp tongue could destroy reputations with surgical precision. Together, they ruled through a combination of wealth, beauty, and the kind of casual cruelty that wealthy teenagers often wielded without thought for the damage they caused. They selected targets based on vulnerability and Maya's quiet demeanor. Second-hand clothes and obvious outsider status had painted a target on her back from the moment she walked through the school doors. The incidents had started small, as they always did. Whispered comments about her jacket, deliberate shoulder bumps in the hallway, the occasional snicker when she spoke with her slight accent that betrayed her southwestern roots. Maya absorbed it all with the same stoic silence she had maintained since her mother's funeral. Her strategy simple: stay invisible, get through the day, survive until graduation. She told herself that fighting back would only make things worse, that drawing attention was the last thing she needed when everything inside her felt fractured and raw. What none of them knew, what Maya kept buried beneath layers of grief and carefully constructed invisibility, was that the girl they saw as an easy target had spent the previous 4 years dominating wrestling mats across 3 different states. Before the accident, before the move, before the world fell apart, Maya Rodriguez had been a force of nature in the wrestling community. She had earned her first state championship as a freshman, defended it successfully 3 times, and had been recruited by Division I colleges before everything changed. Wrestling had been her mother's suggestion initially, back when Maya was 13 and struggling with anger issues following her grandmother's death. Maria Rodriguez, a former Army sergeant turned nurse, had recognized the fire burning in her daughter and understood that it needed direction rather than suppression. She had driven Maya to practices, cheered from the stands during tournaments, and celebrated every victory with the fierce pride of someone who understood what it meant to fight for what you wanted. The sport had taught Maya more than technique and conditioning. It had instilled in her a deep understanding of leverage, timing, and the importance of remaining calm under pressure. She learned to read opponents, to identify weaknesses in their stance or gaps in their defense. She discovered that size meant less than skill, that aggression without control was easily defeated by patience and precision. Most importantly, she learned that appearing vulnerable could be its own kind of strength, lulling opponents into overconfidence before revealing the fighter beneath. But wrestling belonged to the before times, to the version of Maya who had a future mapped out and a mother to share it with. After the accident, she couldn't bring herself to set foot on a mat, couldn't bear the thought of competing without her biggest supporter watching from the stands. The recruiting calls went unanswered, the scholarship offers expired, and Maya let the sport that had defined her fade into memory along with everything else that had been stripped away. Her father, consumed by his own grief and the demands of establishing himself in a new job at the local engineering firm, barely noticed his daughter's withdrawal. Miguel Rodriguez had always been the quieter parent, content to let his wife handle the emotional heavy lifting while he focused on providing stability. Without Maria's steady presence, father and daughter had become strangers sharing the same small apartment, each lost in their own version of mourning. The apartment itself reflected their emotional state, filled with boxes that remained unpacked months after their arrival, as if keeping their belongings sealed away might somehow preserve the life they had lost. Maya's wrestling trophies stayed buried in cardboard, along with photographs from tournaments and the proud newspaper clippings her mother had saved. The only reminders of her athletic past were the muscle memory that still guided her movements, and the calluses on her hands that hadn't yet faded. Maya's daily routine had become a study in avoiding notice. She arrived at school early to claim a locker in a quiet hallway, chose seats in the back of classrooms where teachers were less likely to call on her, and spent lunch periods in the library where the popular students rarely ventured. She spoke only when spoken to, completed assignments with competent but unremarkable effort, and had managed to make it through 2 months without forming a single meaningful connection. This isolation served her purposes in most ways, but it also made her an increasingly attractive target for students like Chloe, Hunter, and Sophia, who seemed to view her silence as weakness rather than choice. They began testing boundaries, escalating their harassment to see how far they could push before she would react. Maya endured it all with the same grim determination she had once brought to cutting weight for competitions, telling herself that engaging would only make things worse. The morning everything changed began like any other, with Maya arriving early to avoid the crush of students who filled the hallways during normal hours. She was retrieving books from her locker when she became aware of voices echoing in the nearby stairwell, the sound bouncing off marble steps and metal railings to create an acoustic chamber that amplified every word. She recognized Chloe's voice immediately, its cultured tones carrying clearly despite the attempt at whispered conversation. They were discussing her, she realized with a sinking stomach, their words painting her as pathetic and amusing in equal measure. Hunter's deeper voice joined the conversation, and Maya caught fragments that made her hands clench involuntarily. They were planning something, their excitement barely contained as they outlined their intentions. The grand staircase they mentioned, and Maya's blood ran cold as she understood their meaning. The central staircase was Riverside Falls High's architectural centerpiece, a sweeping marble construction that connected the school's 2 main floors. Students gathered there between classes, treating the wide steps like an amphitheater where social dramas played out daily. It was visible from multiple angles, ensuring that any incident would have maximum witnesses. It was also dangerous, with hard edges and a significant drop that could cause serious injury to anyone unlucky enough to fall. Maya closed her locker with deliberate calm, her mind already shifting into the analytical mode that had served her well in competition. She could feel the familiar tightness in her shoulders that preceded action, the way her breathing automatically regulated itself as adrenaline began to flow. For the first time in months, the fog of grief lifted slightly, replaced by something sharper and more focused. As she walked toward her first period class, Maya found herself cataloging details with the precision of someone preparing for battle. The layout of the hallways, the timing of class changes, the positions of security cameras, the likely escape routes. She noted which teachers kept their doors open during class periods and which administrators patrolled the halls. Old habits died hard, and the strategic thinking that had made her a formidable wrestler was awakening from its forced hibernation. The day passed with agonizing slowness, each class period feeling like an eternity as Maya waited for the inevitable confrontation. She could feel eyes on her throughout the morning, subtle glances from students who had clearly been told to watch for something. The anticipation was almost worse than whatever they had planned. The knowledge that she was walking toward a trap, but unable to avoid it without revealing that she knew. During lunch, Maya sat alone at her usual table in the corner of the cafeteria, picking at a sandwich while observing the social dynamics around her. Chloe held court at the popular table, her animated gestures and bright smile masking whatever cruelty she was orchestrating. Hunter sprawled in his chair with the casual confidence of someone who had never been challenged, while Sophia documented their conversation with strategic photographs for her social media empire. Maya watched them with new eyes, seeing past their superficial appeal to identify the weaknesses beneath. Chloe's need for constant validation, Hunter's reliance on intimidation rather than actual skill, Sophia's brittle perfectionism that would crumble under real pressure. They were impressive only to people who had never faced genuine adversity, and Maya had learned long ago that true strength was often found in the quietest corners. The afternoon brought an unexpected complication when Coach Martinez approached her after her last class, his weathered face creased with concern. He was the wrestling coach, though his program consisted of barely a dozen participants and received minimal funding from the school district. He had noticed Maya's movements in the hallways, he said, the way she carried herself with an athlete's posture, despite her obvious attempts to remain invisible. They talked briefly about her background, though Maya revealed little beyond acknowledging that she had wrestled before. Coach Martinez's eyes lit up with hope as he spoke about rebuilding the program, about finding students who understood that wrestling was as much about mental toughness as physical ability. Maya listened politely but offered no commitments, her mind already focused on more immediate concerns. As the final bell rang and students began their exodus from the building, Maya gathered her belongings with methodical precision. She could feel the familiar pre-competition calm settling over her, the way her heart rate remained steady despite the circumstances. Whatever Chloe, Hunter, and Sophia had planned, they were about to learn that their quiet target was not as defenseless as she appeared. The time for hiding was over. The marble staircase at Riverside Falls High School had witnessed countless moments of teenage drama over the decades, its polished surface reflecting the fluorescent lights that cast everything in stark, unforgiving brightness. Built during the school's renovation in the early 2000s when the town's ski resort expansion brought unprecedented wealth to the area, the staircase served as both architectural centerpiece and social theater.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
2 stories of gleaming white marble stretched upward, flanked by brushed steel railings that felt ice cold to the touch even in the heated building. Each step measured precisely, designed more for visual impact than practical use, creating a grand ascent that demanded attention from anyone entering the main foyer. Students naturally gravitated toward this central space during class changes, transforming the area into a living stage where reputations were made and destroyed with equal frequency. The acoustics were perfect for carrying voices, whether whispered, secrets or shouted confrontations, and the multiple vantage points from surrounding hallways ensured that nothing significant happened without witnesses. Teachers had learned to avoid the area during peak times, understanding that teenage politics required space to unfold without adult interference, even when that interference might prevent someone from getting hurt. The morning light filtering through the tall windows cast geometric shadows across the marble, creating patterns that shifted with the movement of clouds across the November sky. Outside, the Rocky Mountains dominated the horizon, their snow-covered peaks serving as a constant reminder of the natural forces that shaped this community. Riverside Falls had grown around the intersection of three mountain valleys, its location chosen originally for the timber industry, but evolved into something far more prosperous when developers recognized the area's potential for winter sports. Tourism. Maya moved through the hallways with heightened awareness, every sense attuned to the subtle currents of hostility that seemed to follow her like a gathering storm. The building itself felt different today, as if the very walls were anticipating violence. Students clustered in familiar groups, their conversations creating a constant buzz of activity that masked deeper undercurrents of tension. She noticed how conversations paused when she passed, how eyes tracked her movement with the predatory focus of spectators gathering for entertainment they knew was coming. The social ecosystem of Riverside Falls High operated according to unwritten, but universally understood rules. Wealth provided the primary currency, followed closely by athletic achievement, physical attractiveness, and family connections within the community. Students who possessed multiple advantages found themselves elevated to positions of almost unchallenged authority, while those lacking these qualities were relegated to increasingly marginalized positions within the hierarchy. Maya, as a newcomer, without money, connections, or apparent talents, had been automatically assigned to the bottom tier, making her fair game for anyone seeking to demonstrate their superior status. The school's administration maintained the fiction that they fostered an inclusive environment where all students could thrive. But the reality revealed itself in countless small ways throughout each day. Teachers called on certain students more frequently, coaches paid attention to athletes from established families, and disciplinary actions seemed to affect some demographics more severely than others. The message was clear, fitting and required conformity to expectations that were never explicitly stated, but always rigidly enforced. Maya passed the trophy cases that lined the main hallway, their contents telling the story of Riverside Falls High's priorities with crystal clarity. Football dominated the displays, with championship trophies dating back 3 decades and photographs of celebrated players who had gone on to college success. Basketball, skiing, and volleyball also claimed significant space, their achievements documented with the reverence typically reserved for religious artifacts. Wrestling, when mentioned at all, occupied a small corner with outdated equipment and faded photographs that suggested the program's glory days had ended long ago. The absence of wrestling from the school's celebrated sports reflected broader attitudes within the community. Wrestling was viewed as too working class, too unglamorous for a town that prided itself on sophisticated winter sports and country club athletics. Parents who could afford private ski lessons and equipment worth thousands of dollars saw little appeal in a sport that emphasized struggle, sweat, and the kind of physical confrontation that left participants bruised and exhausted. Wrestling required a particular mindset, one that embraced discomfort and found strength in adversity, qualities that seemed increasingly rare in an environment where privilege provided cushions against most forms of hardship. The morning progressed with Maya hyper-aware of being watched, studied, evaluated by students who seemed to sense that something significant was approaching. She recognized the pattern from her competitive days, the way tension built before important matches as opponents sized each other up and spectators prepared for combat. The difference was that in wrestling, both participants understood they were entering a contest with rules, referees, and safety measures. What was building around her felt far more dangerous, lacking the structure and safeguards that made athletic competition relatively safe despite its intensity. Chloe Bennett commanded attention wherever she moved through the building, her presence creating ripples of activity as other students adjusted their positions to accommodate her passage. She wore confidence like expensive perfume, subtle but unmistakable, drawing people into her orbit through a combination of charisma and barely concealed threat. Her followers understood that proximity to power came with obligations, chief among them the willingness to participate in whatever entertainment she devised. Today, that entertainment would apparently involve teaching the new girl about her proper place in the social order. Hunter Morrison embodied the particular type of teenage, masculine aggression that flourished in environments where physical size and athletic ability were worshipped above all other qualities. His swagger through the hallways communicated ownership, as if the building itself existed for his pleasure and convenience. Other students, particularly smaller or less athletic ones, instinctively moved aside when he approached, their deference so automatic it seemed choreographed. Maya watched him interact with teachers, noting how even adults seemed slightly intimidated by his presence, their attempts at authority undermined by their obvious awareness of his protected status within the school's power structure. Sophia Walsh represented perhaps the most modern form of teenage cruelty, wielding social media like a precision instrument capable of destroying reputations with surgical efficiency. Her phone remained constantly in motion, documenting everything for her carefully curated online presence that painted Riverside Falls High as a glamorous backdrop for her personal drama. She understood that in the current era, humiliation could be immortalized and amplified beyond anything previous generations of bullies could have imagined. The prospect of creating content that would generate engagement, shares, and validation clearly excited her more than any concern for the human cost of that entertainment. The physical layout of the school seemed designed to facilitate the kind of hierarchical enforcement that was about to unfold. Long hallways created natural runways where conflicts could develop over distance, building momentum before reaching their conclusions. The central staircase provided an elevated stage that ensured maximum visibility for whatever drama unfolded there. Security cameras, while present, were positioned primarily to monitor entrances and exits rather than the interior spaces where most student interactions occurred. The message was clear. What happened between students was their own business, as long as it didn't significantly disrupt the educational process or create liability for the institution. Maya found herself studying the marble staircase with new intensity as she passed it between classes. The surface looked treacherous, its polished smoothness suggesting that anyone who lost their footing would slide rather than simply stumble. The height represented a genuine danger. 2 full stories with landing platforms that could break bones if someone hit them wrong. The steel railings, while aesthetically pleasing, offered sharp edges and hard surfaces that could cause serious injury during any kind of collision. Whoever had designed this space had prioritized visual impact over safety, creating a beautiful but potentially deadly architectural feature. The students who gathered on and around the staircase during class changes represented every level of the school's social hierarchy, but their positioning revealed the invisible boundaries that governed their interactions. Popular students claimed the upper levels, their elevated position providing both literal and symbolic dominance over those below. Middle-tier students occupied the main landing and lower steps, while outcasts and newcomers were relegated to the surrounding floor space. their exclusion from the prime territory, marking their status as clearly as any verbal declaration. Maya noticed how conversations flowed through this space, with information traveling up and down the social ladder through carefully maintained networks of influence and dependence. Gossip, rumors, and social intelligence moved like currency, traded for access, protection, or simply the temporary pleasure of being included in something larger than oneself. She could see how easily someone could become the focus of this collective attention, how quickly whispered speculation could transform into public judgment and, ultimately, public punishment. The temperature in the building seemed to fluctuate with the emotional climate, though Maya suspected this was more psychological than physical. The heating system struggled against the November cold seeping through windows and doors, creating pockets of warmth and chill that mirrored the social environment. Near popular students, the air felt charged with energy and possibility. Around isolated individuals like herself, it felt thin and brittle, as if it might shatter at any moment and leave everyone exposed to elements they weren't prepared to face. Teachers moved through this environment with varying degrees of awareness and concern. Some seemed genuinely committed to creating safe educational spaces, but they were outnumbered by those who had learned to ignore the subtle cruelties that didn't rise to the level of obvious violence. The unspoken agreement seemed to be that teenage social dynamics were natural forces beyond adult control, requiring management rather than prevention. As long as grades remained acceptable and no one ended up in the hospital, the daily psychological warfare that defined student life could continue unchecked. The lunch period brought a temporary shift in energy as students dispersed to various locations throughout the building and grounds. Maya used this time to conduct what amounted to reconnaissance, observing the patterns of movement and interaction that would likely influence whatever confrontation was approaching. She noted which hallways remained busy during lunch, which ones emptied completely, and where teachers were most likely to be present. The information felt familiar, like the tactical preparation she had once done before important wrestling tournaments when studying. Opponents and venues could provide crucial advantages. The cafeteria itself served as a microcosm of the larger social environment, with seating arrangements that reflected and reinforced existing hierarchies. The popular table commanded the center of the room, its occupants surveying their domain with the casual authority of medieval nobility. Athletic teams claimed adjacent territory, their proximity to power marking their elevated status, while their separation maintained important distinctions. Academic achievers, artists, and various subcultural groups occupied the middle distances, while the truly marginalized found themselves pressed toward the room's edges, their isolation serving as both protection and punishment. Maya chose a small table near the windows, positioning herself where she could observe the entire room while maintaining the appearance of disinterest. She watched the flow of interaction, noting how certain students moved freely between different groups while others remained strictly confined to their assigned territories. The popular table drew constant streams of visitors, students seeking audience or offering tribute in the form of gossip, compliments, or simple acknowledgement. Chloe held court at the center of this activity, her reactions determining whether visitors were welcomed, tolerated, or dismissed with devastating efficiency. The afternoon brought a noticeable shift in atmosphere as word spread through unofficial channels that something significant was planned. Maya could feel the anticipation building like pressure before a storm, manifesting in sideways glances, hushed conversations, and the particular kind of restless energy that preceded public spectacles. Students who normally ignored her existence seemed suddenly aware of her presence, their attention creating an almost physical weight that followed her through the hallways. The final class period felt interminable as Maya sat through lectures that seemed increasingly irrelevant to her immediate circumstances. She found herself automatically assessing the other students in the room, categorizing them as potential allies, enemies, or neutral observers who would simply bear witness to whatever unfolded. The exercise felt familiar from her wrestling days, when she would study tournament brackets and evaluate potential opponents. But the stakes felt higher now because there would be no referees to enforce rules or coaches to provide guidance. As the dismissal bell approached, Maya gathered her belongings with deliberate calm, her movements economical and precise in a way that would have been recognizable to anyone familiar with athletic preparation. She felt the familiar tightness in her shoulders that preceded competition, the way her breathing automatically regulated itself as her body prepared for physical exertion. The months of grief and isolation hadn't eliminated the muscle memory and mental conditioning that had made her a champion. They had simply buried them beneath layers of pain and withdrawal. The hallways filled with students eager to begin their weekend, their voices creating a cacophony of excitement and relief that masked the darker currents flowing through the building. Maya moved through this chaos with heightened awareness, every sense attuned to potential threats and opportunities. She could feel destiny approaching like a freight train, unstoppable and devastating, carrying the potential to transform everything about her carefully constructed invisibility. The marble staircase gleamed under the afternoon light, its surface reflecting the movement of students and staff as they prepared to leave for the day. In minutes, this architectural centerpiece would become a battleground where months of accumulated tension would finally explode into violence. Maya approached it with the steady rhythm of someone walking toward their fate, each step bringing her closer to a confrontation that would reveal whether the girl who had once dominated wrestling mats still existed beneath the grief and isolation that had defined her recent existence. The stage was set, the players were in position, and the marble steps waited to receive whatever drama was about to unfold on their unforgiving surface. Maya Rodriguez had learned to exist in the spaces between notice and invisibility, a skill that served her well in the hostile environment of Riverside Falls High, but came at a cost she was only beginning to understand. Each morning brought the same routine of deliberate camouflage, oversized clothing that disguised her athletic build, careful posture that minimized her height, and practiced expressions that revealed nothing of the turmoil churning beneath the surface. The transformation from state wrestling champion to anonymous target had taken months to perfect, but Maya wore her new identity like a second skin, even as it suffocated everything that had once made her feel alive. The oversized military jacket that had become her signature piece carried more weight than its fabric should have held. It had belonged to her mother during Maria Rodriguez's deployment to Afghanistan, where she had served as a combat medic before transitioning to civilian nursing. The jacket still held faint traces of her mother's perfume, a subtle vanilla scent that Maya sometimes caught when the wind shifted just right. Wearing it felt like carrying a piece of Maria's strength and courage, qualities that Maya desperately needed but couldn't quite access in her current state of emotional numbness. Before the accident that shattered her world, Maya had possessed the kind of confidence that came from knowing exactly who she was and where she belonged. Wrestling had provided not just athletic achievement, but identity, purpose, and a clear path toward the future. Her technique had been flawless, developed through years of dedicated training that began before dawn and continued long after teammates had gone home. She approached every match with methodical preparation, studying opponents' tendencies, identifying weaknesses, and developing strategic plans that accounted for multiple scenarios. Victory hadn't come from raw aggression, but from superior conditioning, tactical intelligence, and an unshakable belief in her own capabilities. The Rodriguez family had moved frequently during Maya's childhood as Miguel's engineering career took them from one military installation to another, but wrestling had provided consistency across all those relocations. No matter which state they found themselves in, Maya could walk into any wrestling room and immediately understand her place in the world. The sport transcended geographical boundaries, creating a universal language of respect earned through demonstration rather than declaration. Coaches recognized her dedication, teammates accepted her leadership, and opponents learned to fear the quiet girl who methodically dismantled their games plans with surgical precision. Maria Rodriguez had understood her daughter's need for physical challenge and emotional outlet in ways that Miguel never quite grasped. While he worried about injuries and the unfeminine nature of wrestling, Maria saw how the sport channeled Maya's intensity into productive directions. She attended every tournament, sometimes driving hours through difficult weather to watch matches that lasted only minutes. Her presence in the stands provided Maya with an anchor, a constant reminder that someone believed in her abilities even when doubt crept into her own mind during difficult periods. The mother-daughter relationship had deepened through shared understanding of what it meant to be strong women in environments that didn't always welcome female strength. Maria's military service had taught her that leadership often required making unpopular decisions, that protecting others sometimes meant accepting personal sacrifice, and that true courage manifested not in the absence of fear but in action. Despite it, she passed these lessons to Maya through example rather than lecture, demonstrating daily what it meant to face challenges with grace and determination. Wrestling had also provided Maya with a deep understanding of physical mechanics that extended far beyond sport-specific techniques. She knew how leverage could multiply force, how timing could overcome superior size, and how mental pressure could cause opponents to make critical errors. Hours spent drilling escapes from disadvantageous positions had taught her that being in trouble was only temporary if you remained calm and looked for opportunities. Every match was essentially a puzzle to be solved under extreme physical and emotional stress, requiring split-second analysis and decisive action. The technical aspects of wrestling had fascinated Maya from her earliest exposure to the sport. She studied film of elite competitors with the intensity of a scholar, breaking down their movements frame by frame to understand the subtle details that separated good athletes from great ones. Hand placement, foot positioning, breathing patterns, and psychological tactics all became subjects for careful analysis and incorporation into her own growing arsenal. By her senior year, she had developed a reputation for being almost impossible to surprise, her defensive awareness so acute that opponents struggled to implement their preferred attacks. Physical conditioning had been another area where Maya excelled, her training regimen brutal enough to intimidate teammates who considered themselves dedicated athletes. She approached fitness with scientific precision, tracking every workout, monitoring recovery periods, and constantly seeking marginal improvements that would provide competitive advantages. The discipline required for maintaining fighting weight, while building strength, had taught her lessons about delayed gratification and long-term goal achievement that extended far beyond athletics. The college recruitment process had opened Maya's eyes to possibilities she had never imagined growing up in a working-class military family. Scholarship offers arrived from universities across the country, each representing not just free education, but entry into social and professional networks that could transform her entire life trajectory. She had narrowed her choices to 3 schools, all with strong wrestling programs and excellent academic reputations, planning to major in sports medicine with the eventual goal of becoming a physical therapist specializing in athletic injuries. Everything changed on a rainy Thursday evening in April when a drunk driver ran a red light and slammed into Maria Rodriguez's Honda Civic as she returned home from a double shift at the hospital. The impact killed her instantly, according to the police report that Maya had read dozens of times in the months that followed, searching for details that might somehow make the tragedy more comprehensible. The other driver walked away with minor injuries, his expensive SUV built to protect its occupants, at the expense of anyone unlucky enough to get in its way. The funeral had drawn hundreds of mourners, testament to Maria's impact on the military and medical communities where she had served with distinction. Maya sat through the service in a state of disconnected shock, listening to speakers describe her mother's courage, compassion, and dedication while struggling to reconcile these public accolades with the private reality of devastating loss. Wrestling teammates attended in their varsity jackets, coaches offered condolences that felt inadequate, and college recruiters respectfully withdrew their scholarship offers as it became clear that Maya's priorities had fundamentally shifted. Miguel Rodriguez had reacted to his wife's death by throwing himself into work with the desperate energy of someone trying to outrun grief. His employer offered a transfer to Colorado, and he accepted immediately, seeing geographic distance as potential emotional relief from memories that haunted every familiar location. The decision to move had been made without consulting Maya, who found herself uprooted from everything that had provided stability and meaning, just when she needed those connections most desperately. The transition from celebrated athlete to anonymous newcomer had proven more difficult than Maya anticipated. Riverside Falls High possessed none of the wrestling culture that had shaped her previous schools, viewing the sport as antiquated and insufficiently glamorous for their affluent student body. Without wrestling to provide identity and social connection, Maya found herself adrift in an environment that seemed specifically designed to exclude anyone who didn't possess the right combination of wealth, beauty, and social connections. The first months in Colorado had passed in a haze of emotional numbness that made everything feel distant and unreal. Maya attended classes without engaging, completed assignments with mechanical efficiency, and spent evenings alone in her room while Miguel worked late or attended grief counseling sessions that he claimed were helping but clearly weren't. The unpacked boxes that filled their apartment served as daily reminders that they were living in temporary limbo, neither fully departed from their old life nor committed to building a new one. Wrestling gear remained buried in one of those boxes, unused since the day of Maria's funeral when Maya had competed in her final high school tournament. She had won that match decisively, her performance fueled by rage and grief that transformed her usual tactical approach into something more primal and devastating. Afterward, she had walked away from the sport that had defined her for nearly a decade, unable to imagine stepping onto a mat without her mother watching from the stands. The physical conditioning that had once been central to Maya's daily routine gradually deteriorated as weeks turned into months without structured training. She maintained basic fitness through hiking in the nearby mountains, the solitary nature of the activity matching her emotional state, but the explosive power and technical precision that had made her a champion slowly faded from lack of use. Her body retained muscle memory and fundamental strength, but the sharp competitive edge had dulled through disuse and emotional neglect. Sleep came irregularly, interrupted by dreams that mixed wrestling memories with scenes from the accident she hadn't witnessed but had constructed from police reports and witness statements. She would wake at 3 in the morning with her heart racing, phantom sounds of screeching brakes and shattering glass echoing in her mind. The darkness of her room felt oppressive during these episodes, filled with shadows that seemed to mock her former confidence and strength. Grief counseling sessions at school had proven frustratingly inadequate, led by well-meaning counselors who seemed to view loss as a problem to be solved rather than a fundamental alteration of existence that required complete reconstruction of identity and purpose. Their suggestions about moving on and finding closure revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of how deeply trauma could rewire someone's basic relationship with the world. Maya attended these sessions to satisfy administrative requirements, but participated minimally, protecting her real emotions from people who lacked the experience to understand them. The isolation that had initially felt protective gradually became its own form of prison, cutting Maya off from potential sources of support and connection. She observed other students forming friendships and romantic relationships with the detached interest of an anthropologist studying alien behavior, unable to imagine caring enough about anyone to risk the vulnerability that meaningful connections required. The prospect of opening herself to further loss felt unbearable when she was still struggling to process the devastation that had already occurred. Academic performance remained adequate through sheer force of habit rather than genuine engagement with learning. Maya completed assignments and participated in discussions when directly questioned, but her intellectual curiosity had vanished along with her athletic ambitions. Teachers noted her withdrawn behavior in progress reports, but interpreted it as typical adjustment difficulties rather than signs of deeper trauma that might require intervention. The oversized jacket had become more than clothing. It was armor against a world that suddenly felt dangerous and unpredictable. Maya found herself touching the worn fabric during moments of particular anxiety, seeking comfort in the tangible connection to her mother's memory. The garment's military origin seemed appropriate for someone engaged in daily battles against despair and purposelessness, even if those struggles remained invisible to outside observers. Hidden beneath the grief and isolation, however, the fundamental qualities that had made Maya a champion wrestler remained intact, dormant, but not destroyed. The analytical mind that had dissected opponents' weaknesses still functioned, now focused on navigating social hierarchies and avoiding confrontation. The physical awareness that had made her nearly impossible to take down unconsciously assessed threats and calculated escape routes. The mental toughness that had carried her through grueling training sessions provided reserves of strength she could access when circumstances demanded it. Maya understood that her current vulnerability was largely performative, a protective strategy rather than accurate reflection of her capabilities. The girl who cowered in hallways could still execute devastating takedowns if necessary. The student who avoided eye contact possessed the same competitive fire that had intimidated opponents across 3 states. The daughter who remained paralyzed by grief carried within her the warrior spirit that Maria Rodriguez had recognized and nurtured through years of unconditional support. The approaching confrontation with Chloe, Hunter, and Sophia represented more than teenage bullying. It was a test of whether Maya could access those buried strengths when survival required it. The marble staircase that had been chosen as the stage for her humiliation might instead become the location where she rediscovered the fierce competitor who had been temporarily buried beneath layers of trauma and protective numbness. As dismissal time approached and the inevitable confrontation drew near, Maya felt stirrings of something that had been absent for months, the cold, calculating focus that preceded decisive action. The girl who walked toward that staircase carried more than grief and vulnerability. She bore the accumulated knowledge and skill of thousands of hours spent learning to fight. Chloe Bennett had perfected the art of ruling through strategic cruelty over the course of her 4 years at Riverside Falls High School, transforming teenage social dynamics into a carefully orchestrated system of dominance that would have impressed medieval royalty with its efficiency and ruthlessness. Her power didn't stem from any single attribute, but rather from a calculated combination of inherited privilege, natural charisma, and an almost supernatural ability to identify and exploit the weaknesses of anyone who crossed her path. She wielded influence like a precision instrument, capable of elevating someone to social prominence or destroying their reputation with equal ease, depending on how their existence served her broader objectives. The Bennett family name carried weight throughout Riverside Falls that extended far beyond typical wealthy family influence. Chloe's grandfather had been instrumental in developing the ski resort infrastructure that transformed the area from struggling mountain town to premier winter destination, and her father currently owned controlling interests in 3 of the region's most profitable slopes. Their sprawling mountain estate, visible from the school parking lot, served as a constant reminder of the financial resources that backed Chloe's social position. When she threatened consequences for crossing her, everyone understood that those consequences could extend far beyond typical teenage drama into real-world impacts on families, livelihoods, and community standing. What made Chloe particularly dangerous was her sophisticated understanding of power dynamics that went far beyond what most teenagers ever developed. She had spent her childhood observing how her parents navigated business and social relationships, learning that true control came not from obvious displays of force, but from creating systems where people policed themselves out of fear of losing. Access to benefits she controlled. Her parties became legendary not just for their extravagance, but for their exclusivity, with invitations serving as valuable social currency that could be granted or withdrawn based on her current favor. The physical aspects of Chloe's dominance were carefully maintained through resources most students couldn't access. Personal trainers kept her body in magazine-perfect condition, while professional stylists ensured that her appearance always projected effortless superiority. Her platinum blonde hair required monthly maintenance that cost more than many families spent on groceries, but the investment paid dividends in the immediate recognition and deference it commanded. She understood that in teenage hierarchies, appearance often mattered more than substance, and she invested accordingly in maintaining visual symbols of her elevated status. Hunter Morrison represented the more traditional form of high school dominance, built on athletic achievement and physical intimidation that had served alpha males for generations. His 6'3" frame carried 220 pounds of muscle sculpted through years of dedicated training, making him an imposing presence in any environment. Football had provided the foundation for his social elevation, his performances on Friday nights earning the kind of community worship typically reserved for professional athletes in larger cities. Local newspaper coverage of his achievements filled multiple scrapbooks, and college recruiters had been calling since his sophomore year, virtually guaranteeing him a full scholarship to continue his athletic career. The Morrison family occupied a different tier of Riverside Falls society than the Bennetts, their wealth newer and more dependent on continued athletic success. But Hunter had learned to leverage his physical gifts into social advantages that extended far beyond sports. His mere presence in hallways caused subtle shifts in crowd dynamics as smaller students instinctively moved aside, their deference so automatic it appeared choreographed. Teachers treated him with the careful respect reserved for students whose athletic achievements brought positive attention to the school, overlooking behavioral issues that would have resulted in serious consequences for less prominent students. Hunter's relationship with violence was complicated by the controlled aggression required for football success, where channeled brutality was not just acceptable but celebrated. He had learned to calibrate his intimidation tactics carefully, applying just enough physical pressure to achieve desired results, without crossing lines that might threaten his athletic eligibility. A hand placed heavily on someone's shoulder, deliberate invasion of personal space, or aggressive posturing usually proved sufficient to establish dominance without creating incidents that required administrative intervention. The psychological aspects of Hunter's bullying were perhaps more sophisticated than his victims realized. He possessed an intuitive understanding of how physical size and athletic reputation could be weaponized through suggestion rather than actual contact. The threat of violence, carefully implied but never explicitly stated, often proved more effective than actual aggression because it allowed targets to terrorize themselves with imagined possibilities while he maintained plausible deniability about his intentions. Sophia Walsh completed the triumvirate through mastery of the most modern forms of teenage warfare, wielding social media and digital connectivity like weapons that previous generations of bullies could never have imagined. Her Instagram account boasted over 15,000 followers, an astronomical number for a high school student that reflected both her photogenic appearance and her talent for creating engaging content. She understood intuitively how online platforms could amplify and immortalize moments of humiliation, transforming temporary embarrassment into permanent digital scars that followed victims far beyond their high school years. The Walsh families Wealth was more subtle than the Bennett's ski resort empire or the Morrisons' athletic prominence, built on successful real estate investments and technology sector involvement that provided substantial resources without obvious community visibility. This relative anonymity allowed Sophia to operate with less scrutiny than her more prominent partners, positioning herself as the group's intelligence operative who gathered information and coordinated attacks, while maintaining appearances of innocence when confronted by authority figures. Sophia's approach to social destruction relied heavily on documentation and distribution, strategies that maximized viral potential. She had developed an almost scientific understanding of what types of content generated engagement, which platforms reached different demographic groups, and how timing could amplify or diminish impact. Her phone never left her hand, constantly recording interactions that might prove useful for future manipulation, blackmail, or simple entertainment value. When shared with her extensive network of followers and imitators, the three had formed their alliance during freshman year through a combination of shared social advantages and complementary skill sets that made them more powerful together than they could have been individually. Chloe provided the financial resources and social connections that opened doors throughout the community. Hunter contributed physical presence and athletic credibility that impressed both peers and adults. Sophia supplied technological expertise and digital reach that extended their influence far beyond face-to-face interactions. Their targeting strategies had evolved over years of experimentation with different approaches to maintaining social dominance. They had learned that random cruelty created unpredictable enemies, while carefully selected victims who appeared vulnerable and isolated generated maximum entertainment value with minimal risk of organized resistance. New students were particularly attractive targets because they lacked established support networks and didn't understand local social dynamics well enough to mount effective defenses against coordinated attacks. Maya Rodriguez had attracted their attention through a combination of factors that made her an ideal candidate for their particular brand of systematic harassment. Her obvious outsider status marked her as socially vulnerable, while her withdrawn behavior suggested someone unlikely to fight back effectively. The military jacket she wore constantly provided easy ammunition for mockery, its association with her deceased mother adding emotional vulnerability that could be exploited for maximum psychological impact. Her father's working-class background and their modest apartment in the less fashionable part of town signaled that she lacked the financial resources or community connections that might protect other students from sustained harassment. The decision to escalate their campaign against Maya to physical violence had been building for weeks, as they grew frustrated with her failure to provide the satisfying reactions they typically extracted from their targets. Her stoic acceptance of verbal abuse and social isolation had denied them the emotional payoff they craved, leading to increasingly desperate attempts to provoke visible distress. The marble staircase incident represented a calculated escalation, designed to finally break through her defensive numbness and generate the kind of spectacular humiliation that would satisfy their appetites for dominance and entertainment. Chloe had conceived the basic plan during lunch period conversations, where the trio often discussed potential targets and strategies for maintaining their social supremacy. The central staircase provided perfect staging for maximum visibility, ensuring that whatever happened would be witnessed by dozens of students whose phones would capture every moment for later distribution and analysis. The marble surface itself suggested possibilities for physical comedy that would transform Maya's pain into entertainment for their audience. Hunter's role in the planned assault reflected his function as the group's primary source of physical intimidation and actual violence when psychological tactics proved insufficient. His athletic training had taught him precisely how much force could be applied without causing injuries serious enough to trigger major investigations, while his protected status as a star football player provided insurance against significant consequences even if administrators became involved. The prospect of physically overpowering someone smaller and weaker appealed to instincts that football had, refined but not fully satisfied. Sophia's contribution to the planning process focused on documentation, strategies that would maximize the viral potential of Maya's humiliation while protecting the participants from serious repercussions. She had identified optimal camera angles that would capture the action without clearly showing the trio's faces, ensuring plausible deniability if questioned by authorities. Her extensive experience with social media algorithms informed decisions about how to package and distribute the content for maximum reach and engagement across multiple platforms. The psychological dynamics driving their group behavior reflected broader patterns of adolescent social development that had been warped by excessive privilege and insufficient accountability. None of the three had ever faced serious consequences for their actions, leading to escalating boundary testing as they sought new forms of stimulation and validation. Their parents, busy with their own professional and social obligations, had largely outsourced child-rearing responsibilities to schools and communities that were either unwilling or unable to impose meaningful discipline on wealthy students whose families provided significant financial support. The ecosystem of fear they had created throughout Riverside Falls High extended far beyond their direct victims to encompass nearly every student who lacked similar social protections. Teachers, administrators, and even parents had learned to avoid confronting the trio directly, understanding that such challenges often resulted in administrative pressure, community backlash, or professional complications that could affect their careers and reputations. This climate of intimidation allowed increasingly egregious behavior to continue unchecked, as each incident was treated as an isolated occurrence rather than part of a systematic pattern of abuse. Their selection criteria for targets had become increasingly sophisticated as they gained experience with different types of victims and learned what combinations of vulnerabilities produced the most satisfying results. They sought students who were isolated but not completely invisible, prominent enough that their humiliation would be witnessed and discussed, but lacking sufficient social support to mount effective resistance. Maya's combination of obvious pain, artistic sensitivity, and complete social isolation had made her irresistible as a target for their escalating campaign of harassment. The specific details of their staircase plan had been refined through multiple discussions and reconnaissance missions that revealed the optimal timing, positioning, and execution strategies. They had identified the period immediately after final dismissal as providing the perfect combination of crowded hallways and minimal adult supervision. The positioning near the top of the stairs would allow them to claim that any resulting fall was accidental while ensuring that the marble surface would amplify the physical impact and visual drama of Maya's descent. Chloe's particular contribution to the violence was her ability to provide social justification for the attack that would satisfy any bystanders who might feel uncomfortable witnessing obvious bullying. She had developed a narrative about Maya being disrespectful, antisocial, or somehow deserving of correction that would frame their assault as appropriate enforcement of community standards rather than unprovoked cruelty. This psychological manipulation of witnesses was perhaps her most sophisticated skill, allowing her to commit obvious acts of aggression while maintaining plausible claims of moral authority. Hunter's anticipation of the physical confrontation reflected his growing frustration with victims who failed to provide adequate resistance to make violence feel justified and exciting. Maya's passive acceptance of previous harassment had denied him the satisfaction of overcoming genuine opposition, leaving him hungry for an encounter that would allow him to demonstrate his physical dominance in more dramatic fashion. The prospect of literally bringing someone down from a height appealed to symbolic instincts about establishing hierarchical position through physical dominance. Sophia's excitement about documenting the assault revealed the extent to which social media validation had become her primary source of self-worth and identity. The prospect of creating content that would generate massive engagement, shares, and comments provided psychological rewards that had become more important than any consideration of the human cost of that entertainment. Her followers had come to expect increasingly dramatic content, creating pressure for escalating spectacles that pushed ethical boundaries in pursuit of viral success. The trio's confidence in avoiding serious consequences reflected their accurate understanding of how power dynamics functioned within their community and school system. Previous incidents had taught them that wealthy students with prominent families and valuable athletic abilities operated under different rules than ordinary teenagers, with administrators typically seeking to minimize rather than publicize problems that might affect the school's reputation or community relationships. They had learned to calibrate their behavior carefully, staying just below thresholds that might trigger responses they couldn't control or manipulate. As dismissal time approached and students began gathering their belongings for weekend departure, Chloe, Hunter, and Sophia positioned themselves near the marble staircase with the casual confidence of predators who had identified vulnerable prey. Their casual conversation and relaxed postures concealed careful observation of traffic patterns and potential witness positioning, while their phones remained ready to capture whatever entertainment value they could extract from Maya's anticipated suffering. The stage was set for an encounter that would test whether their assumptions about power, vulnerability, and consequence were as accurate as their previous experiences had suggested, or whether they had finally selected a target whose hidden capabilities would transform their carefully planned assault into something entirely different and far more dangerous than they had imagined possible. The afternoon dismissal bell echoed through the marble corridors of Riverside Falls High School with its usual finality, releasing hundreds of students into weekend freedom while casting long shadows across the polished floors. Maya gathered her belongings with deliberate precision, each movement calculated to appear routine while her senses remained hyper-alert to the shifting dynamics around her. The familiar weight of her mother's military jacket settled across her shoulders like protective armor, its worn fabric carrying memories of strength and courage that felt both distant and immediate as she prepared to leave the relative safety of her final classroom. The hallways filled rapidly with the chaotic energy of teenagers eager to escape institutional constraints, their voices creating a wall of sound that reverberated off hard surfaces and mingled into an almost physical presence. Maya moved through this human current with practiced invisibility, her posture carefully maintained to suggest vulnerability while her eyes tracked movement patterns and exit routes with the tactical awareness that had once made her formidable on wrestling mats. She could feel the approaching confrontation like a storm front, electric and inevitable, building pressure that would soon demand release. Near the central staircase, Chloe Bennett adjusted her position with the subtle grace of someone accustomed to commanding attention without appearing to seek it. Her platinum hair caught the afternoon light streaming through tall windows, creating an almost ethereal effect that drew admiring glances from passing students who remained unaware of the predatory calculation behind her angelic appearance. She monitored the flow of foot traffic with the expertise of someone who had learned to orchestrate social dynamics like a conductor directing a complex symphony, waiting for precisely the right moment to begin the performance she had planned. Hunter Morrison leaned against the steel railing with deceptive casualness, his massive frame creating an imposing silhouette that caused smaller students to unconsciously alter their paths rather than risk accidentally bumping into him. His athletic training had taught him to read body language and timing with split-second precision, skills that translated seamlessly from football fields to social warfare. The anticipation of physical confrontation sent familiar adrenaline coursing through his system, the same chemical rush that had powered countless successful tackles and devastating blocks during his celebrated high school career. Sophia Walsh positioned herself at an optimal angle for capturing whatever drama was about to unfold, her phone already recording in anticipation of content that would generate significant engagement across her social media platforms. She had developed an almost supernatural ability to predict viral moments before they occurred, understanding intuitively which combinations of conflict, embarrassment, and spectacle would resonate most powerfully with online audiences hungry for entertainment. At others' expense, her followers had come to expect increasingly dramatic content, creating pressure for escalating spectacles that pushed ethical boundaries in pursuit of digital validation. The marble staircase itself seemed to anticipate violence, its polished surface reflecting fractured images of approaching students, while the steep angle and hard edges promised devastating consequences for anyone unlucky enough to lose their footing. The architectural centerpiece that normally served as a glamorous backdrop for social interaction had been transformed into a potential weapon through the trio's careful planning and positioning. Every detail of the environment had been considered and weaponized, from the optimal camera angles to the timing that would maximize both physical impact and social humiliation. Maya approached the staircase with the measured pace of someone walking toward their destiny, each step bringing her closer to a confrontation that would either confirm her status as a helpless victim or reveal capabilities that had remained hidden beneath months of grief and strategic withdrawal. Her breathing regulated itself automatically as her body prepared for potential physical exertion, muscle memory from thousands of hours of athletic training awakening from its forced dormancy. The familiar tightness in her shoulders signaled the transition from passive endurance to active readiness, though she maintained the appearance of vulnerable isolation that had made her such an attractive target. The crowd density around the staircase reached optimal levels as students paused to chat with friends or simply enjoy the freedom of dismissal, creating the perfect audience for whatever spectacle Chloe had orchestrated. Most remained oblivious to the predatory dynamics playing out around them, their attention focused on weekend plans and teenage concerns that seemed monumentally important despite their ultimate insignificance. A few more perceptive observers sensed underlying tension without understanding its source, their discomfort manifesting as nervous laughter and restless movement that added energy to the already charged atmosphere. Chloe initiated the attack with her characteristic blend of apparent sweetness and calculated cruelty, her voice projecting just far enough to ensure maximum audience engagement, while maintaining plausible deniability about her true intentions. Her opening comments seemed almost friendly to casual observers, designed to draw Maya into conversation before revealing their venomous purpose. The psychological manipulation had been refined through years of practice, each word chosen for maximum emotional impact while providing escape routes if adult intervention became necessary. "Maya, sweetie, I love what you've done with your look today," Chloe announced with theatrical enthusiasm that immediately drew attention from surrounding students. "That jacket is so authentic military surplus. Did you get it from a thrift store, or is it some kind of family heirloom?" The question appeared innocent enough to bystanders unfamiliar with the ongoing harassment campaign, but Maya recognized the deliberate provocation designed to force either defensive responses that would justify escalation or continued silence that would enable further aggression. Hunter moved with predatory smoothness to block Maya's most direct escape route, his positioning appearing casual to observers while effectively trapping her within the confrontation zone. His physical presence communicated threat through proximity and size differential, psychological intimidation that had proven effective with previous targets who lacked the training to recognize and counter such tactics. The smile he wore seemed friendly enough from a distance, but up close revealed the cold calculation of someone anticipating violence with barely contained excitement. "Yeah, that jacket's really something special," Hunter added with mock admiration that carried unmistakable undertones of menace. "Military families must have such interesting stories. Did your mom ever tell you about her time serving overseas?" Before he allowed the sentence to trail off with deliberate cruelty, letting the implied reference to Maria Rodriguez's death hang in the air like poisoned smoke. The psychological attack was designed to destabilize Maya emotionally, creating vulnerability that could be exploited during the physical assault that would follow. Sophia circled closer with her phone held at optimal recording angles, her movements practiced from countless previous incidents, where she had documented humiliation for later distribution and analysis. Her followers expected regular content. That pushed boundaries and generated controversy, creating pressure for increasingly extreme spectacles that satisfied their appetite for vicarious cruelty. The prospect of capturing genuine pain and defeat excited her more than any consideration of the human cost, social media validation having replaced empathy as her primary emotional currency. Maya felt the familiar cold focus that had once preceded her most successful wrestling matches, emotional noise fading into crystalline clarity as her mind shifted into tactical analysis mode. She cataloged the positions of her 3 attackers, noting Hunter's blocking position, Chloe's central location for maintaining plausible deniability, and Sophia's recording angle that would capture maximum visual impact. The crowd dynamics became equally clear, with potential allies too intimidated or self-interested to intervene, and most observers simply seeking entertainment regardless of its source. "My mother was a combat medic," Maya replied with quiet dignity that seemed to surprise her attackers with its complete lack of defensive anger or emotional breakdown. She saved lives in Afghanistan before dedicating herself to helping people as a civilian nurse. This jacket represents honor, sacrifice, and service to others, concepts that might be difficult for you to understand given your obvious priorities. The response demonstrated emotional control that frustrated their attempts to provoke exploitable reactions while asserting moral authority that reframed the entire confrontation. Chloe's mask of false friendliness slipped momentarily as she realized that Maya was not going to provide the satisfying vulnerability they had expected, her entitled confidence wavering in the face of unexpected resistance. The script she had mentally prepared assumed cowering submission rather than articulate defiance, forcing rapid recalculation of tactics that had previously proven reliable against other targets. Her frustration manifested as escalating aggression, designed to regain psychological dominance through more direct intimidation. "How touching!" Chloe sneered with undisguised venom that revealed her true nature to anyone paying attention. Too bad all that honor and sacrifice couldn't keep her from getting herself killed in a stupid car accident. Maybe if she'd been a better driver, you wouldn't be such a pathetic charity case living in that disgusting apartment with your loser father. The attack was designed to shatter Maya's composure through maximum emotional brutality, crossing lines that even some bystanders recognized as excessive. Hunter interpreted Maya's continued calm as weakness rather than strength, his limited emotional intelligence preventing recognition of the danger he was facing from someone with vastly superior combat training and psychological preparation. His athletic success had been built on overwhelming opponents through size and aggression rather than technical skill, creating blind spots that would prove devastating when facing someone who understood leverage, timing, and the precise application of force. The anticipation of easy domination made him careless in ways that would have horrified his football coaches who had spent years drilling proper technique and tactical awareness. "Time for you to learn your place in this school," Hunter announced, with the confidence of someone who had never faced serious physical resistance. He moved toward Maya with the lumbering directness of a linebacker pursuing a running back, expecting her to retreat or cower as previous targets had done when confronted with his imposing presence. His hands reached out to grab her shoulders and physically force her toward the marble steps, fully committed to violence that he assumed would be one-sided and consequence-free. Maya's response exploded from apparent stillness with the devastating precision that had made her a state champion, muscle memory and trained reflexes activating with mechanical perfection as her body remembered skills that grief had temporarily buried. Hunter's reaching hands never found their target as Maya dropped her center of gravity and slipped beneath his extended arms. Her movement so fluid it appeared almost magical to observers unfamiliar with high-level wrestling technique. His momentum carried him forward into empty space, while she repositioned for counterattack with the smooth efficiency of someone who had drilled such situations thousands of times. The underhook came next, Maya's right arm snaking beneath Hunter's extended left arm and securing a grip that immediately compromised his balance and leverage. Her left hand found his wrist in a 2-on-1 control position that elite wrestlers used to dominate opponents regardless of size differential. The technical execution was flawless, demonstrating years of dedicated training that had developed into unconscious competence, allowing her to apply maximum force with minimal effort while maintaining complete positional control. Hunter's expression shifted from arrogant confidence to shocked confusion as he found himself completely helpless. Despite his significant size and strength advantages, his football experience providing no preparation for the technical sophistication of elite wrestling. Skills. He attempted to use brute force to break free from Maya's grips, but succeeded only in making himself more vulnerable as she used his energy against him through superior understanding of leverage and mechanics. The realization that he was facing someone far more dangerous than her appearance suggested dawned too late to prevent what followed. Maya's hip toss utilized Hunter's forward momentum and elevated position to devastating effect, her technique perfect as she rotated beneath his center of gravity and used precise timing to launch him through the air. His 220-pound frame became projectile motion, following an arc that carried him away from the marble staircase and into the metal lockers that lined the opposite wall. The impact reverberated through the hallway like a gunshot, his body crumpling to the floor amid shocked gasps from witnesses who had expected to see Maya's destruction rather than Hunter's complete domination. Chloe backed away in terror as she realized that her carefully orchestrated humiliation had transformed into something entirely different and far more dangerous than anything she had imagined possible. Her social power evaporated instantly when faced with physical capability that could not be bought, manipulated, or intimidated into submission. The crowd that had gathered expecting entertainment now witnessed her complete loss of control, their phones capturing her retreat for the same viral distribution networks she had hoped to use for Maya's destruction. Sophia continued recording, even as her hands trembled, professional instincts warring with personal fear as she documented the complete reversal of expected power dynamics. Her social media expertise told her that this footage would generate massive engagement, but the content painted her group as incompetent bullies rather than the dominant social forces they had worked years to establish. The viral potential that had initially excited her now threatened to destroy their carefully constructed reputations through permanent documentation of their humiliating defeat. Maya stood over Hunter's groaning form with the calm confidence of someone who had rediscovered capabilities that grief had temporarily obscured, her posture radiating controlled power that commanded respect from even her harshest critics. The girl who had spent months accepting abuse without resistance had revealed herself as someone far more formidable than anyone had suspected, her previous vulnerability exposed as strategic choice rather than inherent weakness. The military jacket that had been mocked now seemed entirely appropriate for someone who possessed warrior skills inherited from her mother's example and her own years of dedicated training. "I gave you every opportunity to leave me alone," Maya stated with quiet authority that carried clearly through the suddenly silent hallway. "You chose to escalate this situation into physical violence, and now you understand why that was a mistake. My mother taught me that strength should be used to protect others, not to prey on those who appear vulnerable. You might want to remember that lesson before you decide to target anyone else." Her words carried the weight of demonstrated capability, transforming from victim's plea into victor's warning. Hunter struggled to regain his feet while nursing what appeared to be bruised ribs and significantly wounded pride. His athletic reputation devastated by footage that would soon circulate throughout their entire community. The star football player, who had never faced serious physical challenge, had been effortlessly dominated by someone 60 pounds lighter, exposing the difference between organized sport conditioning and actual combat training. His intimidation tactics would never carry the same weight after such public demonstration of his limitations against truly skilled opposition. Coach Martinez appeared at the edge of the dispersing crowd, having heard the commotion and come to investigate what had occurred near the central staircase. His experienced eyes immediately recognized elite athletic movement in Maya's positioning and breathing, the subtle signs that identified someone with extensive combat sports training. Despite her months of apparent inactivity, the possibility that had been lurking in his mind since their brief conversation suddenly crystallized into certainty as he realized exactly what caliber of athlete he had been speaking with earlier. Principal Thompson arrived moments later with security personnel who began dispersing crowds and attempting to understand what had transpired in their building's most visible location. Witness accounts varied dramatically depending on observers' loyalties and perspectives, but the physical evidence spoke clearly about who had initiated violence and who had defended themselves with appropriate force. The administrative response would need to account for complicated dynamics involving the school's most prominent students and the liability issues created by their choice to target someone with hidden capabilities. Chloe attempted to salvage something from the disaster by claiming victim status and demanding administrative action against Maya for her unprovoked attack on Hunter. But the numerous witnesses and video evidence made such narratives impossible to sustain. Her usual ability to manipulate authority figures through family connections and social pressure proved useless when confronted with clear documentation of her group's attempted assault and Maya's measured defensive response. The power structure that had protected her for years crumbled when faced with evidence that even wealthy students were accountable for criminal behavior. The viral spread of footage began within minutes as students shared videos across multiple platforms, but the narrative that emerged painted Maya as a heroic figure rather than the victim Chloe had intended to create. Social media users celebrated the quiet girl who had defended herself against privileged bullies, transforming the incident into a symbol of justice prevailing over entitled cruelty. The engagement numbers that Sophia had craved were achieved through content that destroyed rather than enhanced their social standing. In the days that followed, Maya found herself approached by students who had previously remained silent about their own experiences with harassment from Chloe's group, their courage inspired by her example of effective resistance. The wrestling program experienced an unprecedented surge of interest as word spread about their new students' remarkable abilities, with Coach Martinez finally having the talent necessary to rebuild competitive respectability. Maya's father learned about the incident through community channels, his shock at discovering his daughter's continued athletic capabilities, eventually transforming into pride at her courage and restraint under pressure. The transformation was not merely personal but institutional, as administrators were forced to confront systematic bullying that had been ignored or minimized when it primarily affected students without powerful advocates. Maya's measured response to violence had demonstrated that victims possessed agency and capability that demanded respect rather than pity, changing conversations about responsibility and consequence throughout the entire school community. The marble staircase that had been chosen as the site for her humiliation instead became the location where she reclaimed her identity and demonstrated that true strength often wore unexpected faces. Maya returned to wrestling with renewed purpose, channeling her grief into motivation that honored her mother's memory through positive action rather than passive endurance. The sport that had once defined her became a bridge between past and future, allowing her to process trauma while building new connections and goals. Her technical skills, enhanced by months of psychological growth and emotional maturity, made her even more formidable than she had been before the accident that changed everything. The bullies learned harsh lessons about the consequences of targeting individuals based on superficial assessments of vulnerability, their reputations permanently altered by documented evidence of their cruelty and incompetence. Hunter's football career continued, but without the same intimidating presence that had made him effective at terrorizing smaller students. Chloe discovered that social power based on fear rather than genuine leadership was fragile when challenged by someone immune to her weapons. Sophia found that viral content celebrating justice rather than cruelty generated different types of engagement than she had cultivated among her followers. The marble staircase remained unchanged physically, but its symbolic meaning had been permanently altered by the confrontation that revealed how quickly apparent powerlessness could transform into devastating capability. Students who passed it daily were reminded that assumptions about strength and weakness were often wrong, that quiet individuals might possess hidden depths of skill and courage that only emerged when circumstances demanded action. Maya Rodriguez had faced her worst fears and emerged stronger, proving that even the deepest grief could not permanently bury the warrior spirit that her mother had recognized and nurtured through years of unconditional love and support. The girl who had once cowered in hallways now walked with quiet confidence that commanded respect from everyone who witnessed her journey from victim to victor, demonstrating that true triumph came not from avoiding conflict, but from facing it with courage, skill, and unwavering moral conviction. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.